Good afternoon and welcome to the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center. My name is Susan Derwin. I'm the director of the Humanities Center, and we are just delighted that you're all here to attend the 2023-24 inaugural event of our public events series, Imagining California. Today is also the opening of our platform exhibition space just outside this room, the McCune Conference Room. And platform is featuring artistic works of UCSB students and Santa Barbara community members that have been inspired by the idea of imagining California. So at the conclusion of today's talk and reception, I invite everyone to check out the exhibition just outside, which will remain on display throughout our series. And I also want to take a moment to extend my gratitude to the 9 artists whose work we are featuring and thank them for allowing us to share their wonderful visualizations of our series theme. And those artists are Carmen Arayoju, Jesus Balandrano Ramirez, Elena Cardona Soca, Moxie Bright Evan, Kaylee Hartman, Misa Lauren Hickson, Eric A. Mondrian, Andrew Nim, and Theo Schaefer. Finally, before introducing our speaker, I want to tell those students who are here and need to sign in for credit that after the event, we will have sign-in sheets on this banquette that is currently a seat. It is currently a banquette. It will become a counter after the event. And before introducing our speaker, I would like to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center is located. And I would also like to pay respect to elders past and present, as well as other Indigenous people present. Our goal in developing Imagining California was to focus on the contradictions and tensions that, in the broadest sense, define the California experience. And we wanted to do so by listening to the stories of people who live and represent that contestatory experience. Today's speaker, distinguished Professor Cherríe Moraga, is the ideal storyteller to inaugurate that journey. A renowned poet, essayist, and playwright, Moraga writes in a voice that is singular, poetically cultivated and distinct, and that at the same time resonates with and reflects upon the shared histories of the cultures and communities to which she belongs. Moraga began writing early in her life and started publishing her work in the 1980s. In 1981, she co-edited the groundbreaking feminist anthology, This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color. Also in the early 1980s, she co-founded with Barbara Smith and Audre Lorde, Kitchen Table Women of Color Press. She has gone on to author several collections, including a Chicana Codex of Changing Consciousness, Loving in the War Years, and Waiting in the Wings, Portrait of a Queer Motherhood. Moraga served for 20 years as an artist in residence in the Department of Theater and Performance Studies at Stanford University, and in the fall of 2017, she joined UCSB's Department of English, where, with her artistic partner, Celia Herrera Rodriguez, she instituted Las Maestras Center. In 2019, she published Native Country of the Heart to great acclaim, and this year, Haymarket Books published updated anniversary editions of Waiting in the Wings and Loving in the War Years. It is my pleasure and my honor to welcome Cherríe Moraga to inaugurate the IHC Imagining California series with her talk, Imagine This, the Regeneration of Place. Thank you.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Thanks for showing up. I think that's where I'm going to begin. Showing up. Sometimes Sometimes it's hard to show up. It's really, really hard to show up. This is one of those times, really. And the piece I'm going to do is a series of vignettes. I think because I couldn't hold one thought in my mind for very long. It is kind of funny when it's not horrible, you know. Well, I say that is that in terms of I wasn't planning to talk this way, but I see your faces, you know. That's when school matters. When I see your faces, it matters. Education matters. And some of you might have shown up for the check. But you got here. You got here. So I just want to honor the fact of your presence. I really want to thank IHC, particularly Susan and Aaron, for pulling off this series, as they always have, and also in general for the support IHC has given as Maestras Center. I also am always happy, Roberta Cordero, when you're here, when you show up. It means a great deal to me. And you've made some parts of Santa Barbara really, really important for me. I thank you. So what's going to happen is that I am shifting. There's about 6 pieces in this. And they all have really different, they may seem to you as very distinct voices. And I keep thinking about the idea about being what people have called me, a public intellectual. I think I prefer that to organic. Organic seems kind of organic, you know. So, but I think public is that partly our job is to try to make words accessible, to have words matter in a way. And I am constantly struggling with that. I probably have never struggled as much with that until after coming to UC Santa Barbara. And I was in the belly of the beast. I was at Stanford, right? But they kind of left me alone. And now I have this distinguished professorship, and I'm still trying to quite figure out what that means, except it's really good for my paycheck. And my family appreciates it, my families. So I will begin. They are falling all around me. It's a great line from Sweet Honey in the Rock. Wonderful a cappella, black gospel, and so much more. Singing group that I listened to a lot as a young Chicana lesbian in San Francisco. They came to me. They are falling all around me. Within a breath of time, I lost the following people in my closest circle of camaradas, comrades, blood relations, and sisters in arms. My mentor, Sally Gearhart, my father, Joseph Phillip, my brother-in-arms, Dr. Roberto Sintli, my comadre artist, Yolanda M. Lopez, my comadre teatrista Elvida Colorado, my beloved bridge contributor and friend, Mirta Quintanales, my nephew, Stephen, and then there is Mirta Chevran, whose loving changed my life forever. Still, this is how most people in the world live most of the time, with innumerable deaths around them, and so it is. I write against the grain of my own expectations of a guaranteed long life, even as I have already been privileged to have it. The genealogies of La Chicana. I follow one line akin to a spiral moving forward and back, forward and back, forward again, to arrive in place of a disappearing history, a receding origin story, to speak of what I came to know in my own small moment of life as a Chicana with an X, to begin and end us, mark us as a people, un pueblo, how I came to even know an us. That meant the world to me. Where to begin? Perhaps with the shift in tectonic plates, creating a once-thought island in an unnamed ocean of African Spanish origin with single-breasted warrior women large in imagination. The isle's peninsular tip, a wet finger pointing south, beckons North America. After Califas came Colón y su colonialismo, the papal bull and its bullying doctrines of discovery, inter cetera, making souls and slaves of pueblos originarios and the brethren Africans who followed. Carte blanche is the word when God is justification for horror. Still true. First came the Jesuits on a mission up through Baja and present-day Sonora, who quickly turned enlightened by banned books crossing the Atlantic in cargo ships. It was the 17th century, after all. They were soon expelled like bad Catholic schoolboys and sent home to Spain. Franciscans would follow, God forbid, Franciscans followed. Junipero Serra, flagellating himself each night to suffer the whip Indians endured on the daily. The crack of that lashing still grates against Indian bones along 700 miles of California coastline. La polémica. What shattered the Spanish California dream was the nightmare that had already occurred in indigenous Mexico just south of it. Spanish casting of a caste system so specific in its rendering a name for every shade of human cocktail: mestizo, coyote, morisca, loba, mulatto, albino, tonatras, aite, estas. The social implications of which were that anyone willing to learn themselves enough Spanish and get baptized by a friar's oiled thumb and a trickle of water could ostensibly become a Spaniard, not unlike the requirements of US citizenship. While 18th century Europe lights up, the Americas have already darkened in a legacy of genocide. With the expulsion of the Jews and Moors from España 2 centuries before, how is colonization in the name of a Spanish Christ supposed to be any different? In the history of California, one can make no apologies for the mission presidio system, just more souls and swords as policy and praxis. But Mexico's independence in California did close down the missions and made citizens of Native and mestizos alike, at least on paper. It did not abide the one drop of black blood principle as in the American South. California was not the South. That is, not until the South came to California with the rush for gold. The history of California racially is impossible to dissect. California was mestizo from the beginning of so-called Spanish occupation. The first colonizers to arrive through the De Anza Trail were Spanish, yes, but few. The rest black and indigenous and mestizo in ethnicity. How was it that black and Indian disappeared, and with Mexican independence, we become the bad guys after just 30 years as a Mexican state? I'm not apologizing for anyone. Just tired of the lies about how gringo Indian killers become statesmen with their memorial statues still standing tall, and the atrocities of the Out West remain outliers in American history. It is an inarguable fact that between 1846 to 1873, as much as 80% of the native Californians' population died. Gold is discovered in the same year as the signing of the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty. Mexicans step down, miners rush in, and whites control the narrative for the rest of all time, one in which Mexicans, native-born and immigrant, are to this day scapegoated and disparaged as settlers in spite of their native origins. Who were the so-called Mexicans, if not also Indians? What is the racial makeup of Native people in California today? The history of the making of Anglo-California is no news. It is all self-fulfilling prophecy of give me, get it, go for it, and then some. How does one come to terms with a murderous greed that set into motion a covetous rush for gold, which continues to replay itself in the rush for water, the rush for oil, the rush for more and more unsustainable stuff? It is best reflected in the most monosyllabic utterances of the declarative English sentence: I am, I want, I will have. This is what it means to be American. The so-called Enlightenment's perversion of individualism, patriarchy in the full swing of the pickaxe of militarized, extractivist intervention all over the world. I'm holding back a cold. They're falling all around me. Esteban. We are not immigrants, my middle-class relatives attest. I suspect they think here of the familias of bundled children and their laden teenage mothers, those smart jean-fitted boys in thin logoed T-shirts traveling solo at the border. But we are also not gringos. We are mestizos, once Mexican-Americans, a 30-year-old lost nationality, only so if we exterminate our Indian memory and all its relations. 150 years, I'm watching my throat. 150 years after the loss of a Mexican California, a brief moment in Alta California history, my young relation dies from a fentanyl-induced overdose, and somehow I think he is the progeny of our collective cultural amnesia. His death, of course, speaks to a larger crisis in the US, but this death hit my family, perhaps for the same reasons it hit others. The lie of working middle-class America did not protect them, white, black, or brown. I am quite speechless as I document this singular impossibility, the death of one's own child, that is repeated over and over again in the millisecond of a moment all over the world, the stupid, unnecessary dying of our young. In his case, there had been little intervention. Intervention, a word I hate. I returned from my nephew's funeral, doubting myself and my own small, perhaps unnoticed intervention. To name aloud what was missing in my nephew's celebration of life, something missing, perhaps missing in his life itself. Speaker after speaker, young white boy gamers, well-meaning, applauded nephew's good humor, his life of the partying style. They miss him, I know, stunned by the possibility of their own life lost suddenly. And I, unentitled to do so, stand up, my heart in my mouth, to invoke the ancestors, unnamed relations that carried his name, Esteban. They too were addicts at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. That I don't say. Still, I just wanted a moment for us, for the great aunties in the room, for my beautiful and so beloved elder cousin, Stephen's father, to acknowledge the time and place and history from which the Mexican generations that raised both of us survived on this planet. But Stephen did not survive, and my relations had not been called down to mourn nor greet him. Where did the boy go when he left in a coma? Where will this knowing take his parents, my beloved Primo Henry, the last of his kind? They are dying all around me. Mirta. One of the most important loves of my life is dying as I write this. She, in full recognition of the imminent moment pending, no longer pending, she passed on September 10th. She can speak in the past tense of her life as a concluded life. She is in full conciencia between morphine visitations from ancestors whom she's learned to recognize long before this clock time. She, siempre time traveler to such a degree that corporality was of little consequence to her poet's imaginings. Perhaps this is why she decided to let it be the body. Let the body do its thing, to descend with gravity, she assuming the posture of a great and insolent laughing Buddha. After many months without a visit, Mirta would greet my entrance at the Harriet Tubman House for the elder leftists in Berkeley, California, by saying, "Soñé contigo, I dreamed you." No need for apology or guilt from either of us. Our reciprocally long lapses in communication. She dreamed me. What else is there to know? In the last years of her life, Mirta tells me that I have lost the poem in my writing. She asked before dying, "Where is the poetry? Quiero más poesía." She asked me to quit explaining and to speak truth greater than me and my mediocre education and my poor reading skills. They are falling all around me. Genocide. The journey of an imagined California goes backward in time, way back, and then spins forward out of control. The writer tries to rein in the whirling stagecoach of her thoughts, her search conjuring images of a West world spinning off its axis. She's stumbling down a dusty path of the impossible to imagine. It is impossible to imagine genocide. But this is the task at hand when one is required to imagine California. California is no deferred dream. It was already realized in its indigenous antecedents. No romance there, no one-breasted Amazonias, but often bare-breasted peoples making home, ceremony, community, living reciprocally with nature, knowing that its elements required their humility. It was not a perfect world, but it was perfectly enough for them and for then. There is no telling how it might have evolved had the legacy of Colón never dropped anchor upon their shores, never tramped their desiertos, never eviscerated their mineral-rich mountains. We catch glimpses of the before. Roberta and I caught glimpses. She took me there to a place with a taste of what once was. It was a hard road to ride. She cannot walk much, so we drive through her original hunting grounds, she hunting for an uninterrupted and extended moment of home, not sullied by gringo interpretation. I don't remember genocide in my bones. I do sense in me an 18th century sight of bearing witness to horror. I remember rape, the violence of the patriarch. I dream it on rare occasions. I acknowledge the root of an insatiable anger in me, which I work to restrain. I do not fully comprehend how it moves inside me. I watch. Women are so much basura, trash, the playwright writes, as Abuelita collects her dismembered daughter into the black plastic the misogynist left behind. This I know. I close Benjamin Madley's 500 pages on an American genocide because the California Indian catastrophe, as he calls it, is too much information to carry in one day, in one life. I close the book. I will return to it, to recognize my relatives in this story, distant, remote, but viscerally mine. It is so unimaginable, the slaughter, the cruelties, the inhuman capacity to view another as so fundamentally other that one simply can wipe them out, children, man, woman, even when they have enough time to think about it first. Genocide is strategic and timely now. On the hottest days of forever, the Texas governor permits barbed wire traps to be placed inside the waters of El Rio Grande to entrap migrants crossing, pushing them down, drowning our children. On the hottest days of forever, migrants crossing the Sonora Desert are corralled into cages in the midday sun. 114 degrees, 13 dead on that day alone. It is strategic. Our children are fodder. Each death, the intended extinction of another indigena from the south. The bodies that never made it across the border are later fed to U.S. complicit drug cartels. And those that do make it must promise to forget who they are. This is what it means to be American in the United States. This has always been the requirement of citizenship. In New Spain, in Old Mexico, in Anglo-America, in California. Back in the day. California dreaming was an extended lesbian moment, the freest I'd known in an unquestionable body of desire finally expressed. I lived for a time in Sonoma County, just a few months. I, a newly minted lesbian, a shiny copper, naked on the banks of the Russian River, stranger to the Mexican Catholic daughter I left behind. Nobody's daughter now. It was all liberatory acts. Best friend Deborah and I finding swimming holes anew each time the speculators' flags warned us of no return. There was always somewhere else to go, until there wasn't. Monique Wittig's lesbian body may have said it best, its pages opening to the viscera of the female, her desire, its parts all over the place. Wittig, a white French dyke who didn't give a damn, and more power to her. She too helped me to be free for a moment. And all this has to do with California, even as I carried California to a sixth-floor walk-up in New York, or to girlfriend's tiny spot on 135th Street in Amsterdam. We sweated like it was California sex. Better than that. I was free then too for a moment, with no mirror but what she gratefully broke open inside me. Coming home. Aztlán. Books took me there first. I imagined a liberatory Aztlán, learning of it through the pages of a California poet's imaginings, in the spirit of a new people, one that is conscious not only of its proud historical heritage, but also of that brutal gringo invasion of our territories. I read the histories of the loss of half of Mexico with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe, the theft of California by Anglo-America. I knew the facts of war and men and the business of useless treaties demarking nation states. But it was the myth of Aztlán, the storytelling that compelled me to keep walking south, placing my own little patitas on that map of descent into my Mexicano origins. Retracing backwards the Chimecheco journey from the north, Aztlán, to that site where the eagle was said to have originally landed like prophecy on an arm of a nopal, la serpiente hanging from its mouth like a ravenous tongue. Aztlán proffered me an entrance into Mexico in the southwest as my own native country of the heart. I treaded carefully, not to step on the huaraches of anyone distinctly entitled. It took years to make home of it, to allow myself citizenship without title, wearing the battered badge of half-breed and queer. I still love the hard edge of those words, half-breed and queer. I moved through the world of Mexico as a woman writer, which is to say nobody special. No access to inside scoops, no permission to sit with the elders, just breed and queer. Reading the landscape for a sign of belonging, a memory bank I might cross to and find home. I found so much more there in the land of southern Mesoamerican peoples who are less my own than the northern deserts of Mexico. But every place en donde encontré un boco del río, I remembered I had been there before. I once thought I had found our origin story in the silver canyons of Nuevo Mexico, 7 caves. I counted them, only to learn later that they were, in fact, many sites of Chicomotzco. A decade later, traveling with a troupe of teatristas to Cholula, just outside Puebla, the Cholulan guide recognized us as Chicanos, his northern relations from Aztlán. There was no question, no need for identity cards. He knew we had come looking to the right place. We had returned from some place in our own shared histories. It is impossible to describe what it means to find place, to feel finally that you might just belong to something larger than your own personal and conflicted story. For me, and quite privately, as there had been no place for this queer mestiza in the early days of El Movimiento, Aztlán was to become my sacred and profane grounding, my spiritual land base. It housed my Spanglish tongue, my Nahuatl imaginings, and my queer silences. Perhaps it spoke to the subtle and subliminal messages of my own native origins in the deserts of Sonora, or the pure thrust of mestiza conciencia I inherited from my 19th century Mexican-American upbringing in the shadow of the old mission San Gabriel. I remember the first time I returned to the Sonora Desert at the mere age of 8. I promise you the saguaro, ocotillo, the mesquite sang to me. Old, very old songs. I credit the concept of Aztlán for igniting in this suburban Mexican-American the anima to search for home, to continue to search lugar, hogar, in the first place. With or without male acknowledgement, I claimed for us our queer Aztlán. How I became a Chicana lesbian. I want you guys to laugh a little bit. Some of these are, if you hear a little thing in my voice, you can laugh. It's all right. So, how I became a Chicana lesbian. All right. Gloria Anzaldúa recognized me first. It was 1978. But it was a California bear that would bring me back home to stay. 1985. I spied her by accident, a square body in silhouette filling the frame of a Spanish colonial window looking out on the Zocalo of once Tenochtitlan, Mexico City. Her black hair reaching the plane of her nalgas. She wore a huipil. I had traveled for many weeks in Mexico and recognized the design, its familiar message of a people. The only people who you could see wearing huipiles in Mexico outside of Native women were Chicanas. It is our own acknowledgement of relationship. I was attracted to the image, she standing a good distance from the crowd of Mexican feminist literati, perhaps no more than the daughters of the literati, still a caliber of Mexican of which I knew nothing. I had read a piece from my first play, 1983. When they discovered El Templo Mayor beneath the walls of the city, they had not realized that it was she who discovered them. Nothing remains buried forever, not even memory, especially not memory. After I had walked away from the elbowing crowd, I see the apparition. There's also no context to understand that when Bear turns around and we recognize each other, yes, we had met each other briefly in San Francisco, but here in Mexico City, she sees me and announces me cousin. The way we see all our relations as Chicanas, members of an extended familia of others, other than those white women shuffling along the cool cement floors of El Cuarto Creciente. I had to come home. It was not intellectual. It was the tone in her voice. She named me cousin. It meant the world to me. How Californian am I? Crossing state lines at the near close of the Mexican Revolution, my Sonora-born abuela flees a womanizing husband in Tucson, 3 babies in tow, a 4th one on the way, and 10 years into her roughshod marriage. Her marido tracks her down at her sister Victoria's house in Santa Paula, California. Dolores will give birth again, this time to my mother, born in Santa Paula, California, in 1914. They'll leave and return in the early 1920s to birth an 8th child, with my mom already working the sister orchards and her big sister Tencha serving traguitos de tequila to the Mexicano workers in the back porch. The meeting of gringo and Mexican, the subterranean indígena, the whispered identification, reckoning with a misplaced Spanish turned Mexican turned nobody on the side of the border, anesthetized by Hispanicization. They never asked us what we wanted to be called. And when we insisted, they erased us as wannabe Indians, but they encouraged us to want to be gringos, to envy what they took and what they got. If I flip the lens, I might discover that my California herencia also resides in the singular moment of this year, when gathering my sisters and Celia's and my children together, we released the ashes of a San Francisco-born white man, grandfather, to the waters of San Francisco Bay. The act, in what was my father's 100th year, created its own kind of California continuity. He, a World War II vet, a railroad worker, a union man, de Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. His first job, a freight train outpost along the transcontinental route through the Mojave Desert. This is a classic American California story, but it is not the whole story. It is not the story of the initial De Anza Trail, the land route through the Sonora and Mojave deserts that would open Mexico to Alta California and establish the first California settlements in San Francisco. It is not the story of the native land and lives lost there. After my father's death, I lose his fake name on my passport. It's standing between me and perhaps a simpler, truer history, but nothing so simple. Joseph's mother, born in 1885, was a Jewish Gentile passing hotelier along Main Street, Huntington Beach, California. The Kenwood Hotel was an SRO, single-room occupancy residential hotel for World War II and Korean War vets. She had had 5 husbands, one of whom, not his father, gave Joseph his last name and then left. She died when I was 5. I wish I had really known her. Home is never free. And yet we struggle to return there, some of us to some place we imagined or perhaps once truly believed in, because at least there we knew the parameters of our prison, carrying its own contradictory comfort, the beautiful suffering face of our mother perhaps, because suffering for Mexicanas does contain a certain beauty in its familiarity, a heart of regret plentiful and forever grateful when recognized. That is something that matters in a world empty of heart. My beloved Celia returns me to her homeland, Sacra, the very scar of a gold rush California. I don't know why. I don't know why this step came to us. I'm laughing. In contrary to so much in this contrary road of return, but here we are. I kind of hate Sacramento. Laugh. Thank you. Still, we put a mortgage on it. For her, for us, for our kids. She came home to heal some wounds, while the whole damn place is a wound. Sutter's Fort, about 1.5 miles down the road. But maybe that's my work, shuffling these words at times like Scrabbleboard tiles around on the page, while my crooked fingers dig at something about remembering where the veins of gold once ran. Motherlode, how apropos the naming, given that Mother Earth was eviscerated by her self-adopted sons. Okay. Notes on the things that keep me up at night. Yes? Okay, this is a hard one. Okay. From an indigenous perspective, the modern day nation state presents a problem. Once occupied and bordered as such, indigenous pueblos are often forcibly removed into reservations and rancherias, or find themselves making home and getting by or not in indigenous enclaves in cities all across the country. Some are lost in the cracks of migration. This is so in California. Within the United States, de-Indianization becomes deracination and applies to any of us with ethnic, racial identities and cultural knowledges distinct from the master narrative of the West, and without the institutional structures to support those knowledges. The nation state calls it assimilation, or more kindly, acculturation, not to be confused with festive mingling of fandango and Yankee lore. It is a slow and sinister process for the indigenous, the immigrant, the mestizo, and it can move quite invisibly. It is duplicitous, really, tricky. The nation state has a value system which equates freedom with free enterprise and praise at the altar of individualism and competition. It is attractive, this life, as a progressive plotline. But it absolutely counters everything about indigenous values based on the idea of reciprocity, of holding balance through living knowledge of all the elements, of a profoundly interrelational world, the human, plant life, animal, rock, water. Essentially, indigenous values are about paying attention. Curiously, this maxim of indigenous thought is indistinguishable from lo Chicano. See what needs doing, be useful, show up. We aren't always aware of the kind of Indian boarding school education we have received in this country, which has removed us from true sites of sustaining livable knowledges, from kinder to profe. Less violent, of course, less brutal, yes, certainly, but still indoctrination, still in its own way traumatic. Here's where things get especially tricky because we like the language of the nation state. democracy and freedom, as in free elections and again, free enterprise, but everything seems to cost more now. And yes, we appreciate having voice, and we know not everyone in the world has this. We're special in that way, but the me first part gets confusing with the needs of others. They get in the way. And the wars, war after war, 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 after war. So you begin to ask yourself, what are my values? Good question. Enough. To believe in U.S. exceptionalism is to pit one body of people against another. The other made foreign, different, less than by the one in power. However, who or what enacts power at any given moment can change, and it is often us. The shifting face of power. Power can be measuring blood quantum for the right to have a public voice, to say a prayer, put a few twigs of tobacco at the base of a tree. It can turn land acknowledgments into property. And the measuring stick was never imposed by Native people. It was the feds. Power can be a black professor saying all the right words, freedom, democracy, are Hispanic, wrong word, brothers and sisters, wrong word. But to whom and for whom are we speaking? I have struggled with this same question throughout this writing. First world chauvinism in U.S. exceptionalism is U.S. exceptionalism in action. Let's consider for a moment the global south. No, not Africa, not South Asia, but the one just below us on the map, where for the most part English is not spoken, and therefore less critically approachable and can more easily fall off the map of our U.S. political concerns until there's a revolution brewing. English is a first world language all over the world, so yes, it is, and its diasporas gets the most attention. I'm gonna say it something again, if I messed it up. English is a first world language all over the world. And yes, it and its diasporas, that's the place that had been colonized by the English, get the most attention. We are not special because we are English-speaking U.S. citizens, but we act like it, like yo sé todos, without asking what's missing in the picture. When knowledge is defined and attributed value according to its rank in relationship to colonial language, I wonder if we ever arrive at the full picture which globalism requires. From a Caribbean point of view, for example, as my Afro-percussionist friend John Santos reminds me, New Orleans is historically and culturally more Cuban than it is estadounidense, from the United States. American, right? Thank you, she got it. People of color can't help but notice that white America is still calling the visibility shots for people of color. When it matters to them, it matters. Having a BLM sign on your lawn or doing a land acknowledgement before every gathering may do some good, and or maybe it doesn't. Everyone leaves feeling better, even special. And honestly, I appreciate the reminders when needed. I am not discouraging that. But maybe it assimilates people of color and our radical resistance. Just maybe. Maybe it is a neoliberal wolf in the meaning well sheep's clothing, as a word sentence, but you know what I mean. Masking the complexity of real historical inequities and violence. Does it keep us radical when white people are so happy with themselves? And I don't mean that cynically. And I hope that people know when I say white people, but you know what I mean by that, okay? Someone can ask me that question. What do you mean by white people? Okay. And this is a Hispanic Serving Institute. One has to wonder, as this is a Hispanic Serving Institute, one has to wonder, in all our talk of critical race theory, to what degree are the Latino students sitting in the desk in front of you even recognized in the theory? A purely black and white analysis of racism collaborates with US exceptionalism by believing that the borders that contain it are the whole story. Caste by Isabel Wilkerson is a great work. I am learning an enormous amount from it. But why not consider Spanish America caste system just was down south? It's a lot closer. Do we really believe in that border, that border truncates any relational importance? I celebrate the Sikhs, Dalits, and the indigenous Oaxaqueños in their united effort in passing a caste discrimination ban. It didn't pass statewide, but in Fresno, of all places, it passed. In their common cause as farm workers and survivals of historical caste prejudice within their own countries of origin and within their own communities. They made this connection across continents, histories, and native tongues. Perhaps unwittingly, we collaborate with first worldism even as we imagine ourselves interrupting it. As critical imaginers, to continue to turn our backs on the indigenous and obrero speakers of the South is to ignore the very ideologies and praxis we may need to continue as a planet on this side of the globe. Think California before the gold rush. Think about what was lost in that gain. How do we ever recuperate it? We can't. But we may need to get lessons from those in the know, people who on multiple levels may not speak our language. There are Indian children being put in cages as we rightfully require retribution for the genocidal abduction of children into Indian boarding schools. We will recognize the very evident connection with the families in migration. They are indigenous people too, who may not always acknowledge it. De-Indianization, of course, is centuries old. Am I on time? I'm good? Oh, good, okay. Power is the question at hand. Who had it? Who took it? Who done it? How is it the politic of the daily? How is it in the politic of the daily we cannot, with all our fancy educations, understand that race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, region, caste are merely slashes on the page unless we comprehend that each contains an embodied side of knowing in the enactment of power or the lack thereof. That's the true world we live in. It is that specific. Future imaginings. Did you ever think I was going to get to them? I was having trouble imagining a future. It's been a horrible week. Ironically, economically, we have finally achieved the impossible. No borders. Globalization by any other name. How then to remove the oligarchs? How then to revive a movement that will not be bought and sold? To refuse to become another 19th century so-called vendido, even if in the short term it feeds our children. Colombiano President Gustavo Petro, in addressing the UN General Assembly, still imagines a world where Latin America, its waters from the Andes, its winds, its ever sunshine, can provide sustenance for a world economy. If South America doesn't turn desert in the interim is the problem. A 200-year-old Monroe Doctrine is the problem. Latin America will never be your docile citizen, America, and that's America without the accent. In a film, I don't know why I had to put this in, but I had to because I loved it. In a film by Spanish director Pinochet, Pinochet appears as a 250-year-old vampire. Who's seen it? Oh, you got to check it out, right? Okay. Failing death, he returns as okay, it's, what do you say it when you blow the punchline? When you cheat, and you tell them, spoiler, it's spoiler. I'm going to just say it. Okay. Failing death, he returns as Margaret Thatcher's Chilean short pants schoolboy son. Okay? Another dictator lurks in the making, but somehow this very black humor of it gives me hope. In the interim clock is ticking rapidly. I dream a borderless globe where the WTO pays its debt to the global South and trades in survival strategies, creating a flourishing of the local on behalf of the global. Does the US truly imagine that a 200-year-old Monroe Doctrine can possibly survive the disappearance of an Amazon forest? It will be out of their sphere of influence. Nor the mass migration it refuses at the borders of people dispossessed by its own interventions in Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, etc., where democratic elections continue to be purposely misread as communists, and white America and US Latinos also want to believe. It is not all. It is literally counterintuitive to a viable future for anyone except for the 1%, and even they die. I'm thinking here of what's going on in Haiti right now. California imagines as a territory re-identified with the global South, with Mexico as member. I look to the changing leadership in Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, movements in Honduras, Guatemala, a regenerative environmentalism going on. I imagine a disgruntled California finally seceding from the Union and returning to its own indigenous knowledge ways, its social structures, looking south toward a fully integral America, con acento, one which redefines the motherlode as a source of soul. Imagine that. I keep trying to make language be something other than a litany of loss. How many deaths and death threats can one person interiorize in an ever moment's time? How do we find joy in spite, in the midst of loss, because joy is the best of being human? Not joy that pretends, obliterates true knowledge, but one that learns to live with loss, evolving each step of the way, that embraces death, which is so hard to do right now, with so much going on in this world, as quiet, unannounced quest for some kind of transcendence. There is one that does not excuse nor look away from suffering. We are surrounded by illness of all manner. Most days, I am not up to the task. Still, I imagine a quality of consciousness that returns woke to its original African-American impulse, what the young black folks created and got stolen, commercialized by other young folk, and is trivialized by the right. I just am trying to stay awake. The Buddhist version of awake, I confess, moves me. We construct a life in the face of danger. We see through the sheer sheep's clothing of the seduction of success. In the meantime, we do what we have to do to counter death, useless deaths, needless, unnecessarily stupid deaths, war. My God, if God was salmon and the creeks in which they spawned, if God was the great Shasta Mountain yearly melting just enough to fill those rivers like warriors in a voluminous prayer, if God was, these gold digger Americans, then they are the devil themselves. 20 years from now or forever, I walk afraid of and longing for freedom, freedom from useless thoughts, one wish, freedom from presumption, prejudice, how to receive what stands before me and no longer assume I know it, how to unknow to make room for deeper knowing. Much time has lapsed through my looking away. From the deeply intimate on the daily to the profoundly institutional and historical. From genocide to femicide, or is it first femicide to genocide, or does it matter? We are reminded that we humans are less equitable than animal instinct because we kill with prejudice. We have opinions and create mythologies to justify our wrong-headed ideas and our brutal and insatiable hungers. We construct borders of mind and metal. We die with the best and worst of them anyway. And still I think of only one small spit of universe, of a disappearing landscape, my Califas. And with all this knowledge, how is it we remain so ineffectual, so invisible? Where did we go wrong? And how do we continue to fail to correct? How do we return to a side of consciencia that at each step refuses complicity with our dictators? How do we hope with our youth who clamor to find their way free again? We, their product and their promise, their revolt and resolve. I am a Chicana with an X on both sides. Most days, sometimes I just use Chicana. But I am a Chicana with an X on both sides of the border of land and gender and gene pool. It's the best I can do for now. Gracias. Thank you.
Roberta has written, "We are a diaspora in place."
Yeah, exactly. Yes, thank you for that. Well put.
You talked about how, like, in the 80s, you talked about, like, your identity as, like, your sexuality and also your identity culturally. How did all aspects of, like, who you were feel like they intersected, like, maybe like in the 80s and also now? How over time do you think that's developed and changed?
That's a good question. It's funny, you know, I think because we're all those things at once, as we all know. But I remember my compadre once asked me, are you a Chicana lesbian or are you a lesbian Chicana? He would ask me that kind of question too. He's a real wizard. And he said, well, you know, because he always says, I'm a gay Chicano. And so gay is the adjective to his Chicanismo. And he says, I think you're a Chicana lesbian. This is way back in the 80s. I think now I would say I'm a lesbian Chicana. And I think because there's a way in which, and Celia and I talk about this. I mean, she and I are co-directors at LMC, and we realize we're just queer, and so we don't talk about it that much. But it's nothing about hiding. It's like it's so integral, you know, that I just don't. You know, I'm always, my students know the first thing I say. I make sure I tell them I'm queer, and I don't say I'm queer. I make it integral, right? And I think the thing about, and what's weird, because some of it has to do with race, because in these settings, you know, it's like you would think, well, you know, it's so cool, it's kind of cool to be gay. That happened over when I wasn't looking. But anyway, it was like, so it's much more challenging to be Chicana here. It's more challenging to be Chicana in my department, even though I'm the only lesbian that I'm aware of, you know. No one's hit on me or nothing like that. So, no, I'm kidding. But anyway, but it's like I'm the only, you know, and yet I feel like because they probably know more lesbians and have more lesbians integrated into their community than they do Chicanas. In fact, probably for many of them, I'm the only Chicana that they spend any time with, right? That's not a criticism. I'm just saying that's what it is, right? So I find that kind of on the daily, I really got to defend being Chicana. And I think, too, some of it for me is also visual, because I hate the word pass, because pass means that you're trying not to look like a person of color. So I'm not a passing Chican, passing white person, right? And they say now presenting, because I'm white presenting, whatever. And then you say that to other Chicanos, they go, what? Like, you know, so it's all in the eyes of the beholder. But I think also, too, having to kind of be in your face about it. Otherwise it gets missing. But clearly in other settings, you know, where queerness is very taboo, then you got to be queer. And I think that's the task for all of us, is that you want to always be the news in the room, you know? And that's where courage comes in. That's where, and you practice that. I say it because you're a young person, and we're talking about the 80s. That was practice, you know? And it's good practice, because you will find out that once you're my age, if you get really good practice at it, you keep doing it, which means you just keep bringing up what the things that people don't want to hear, right? And it's hard. And it's, you know, it's scary. Anyway, good question. And she liked my answer. That was good. I did. Okay. So am I picking them or someone else is it? This woman here. I don't know who was first. I'm sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to say I found it really powerful, like when you kind of mentioned like this idea of like the suffering Mexicana and it being like really familiar to people. I was wondering like if you can maybe expand on that a little bit more, and maybe like if that idea comes about in your creative work in any way.
Well, the short answer to that is my son always says to me, I don't know why you like to suffer when you're writing, but I really do. I don't like to suffer. I really do suffer, you know. And I think I'm not romanticizing that in any way whatsoever. And that comment you put is not a romanticization of it. It is what I understood growing up as complex, as deep, as a place you had to wonder about, or, you know, and also as writers, that's what we do, like we go looking to understand, you know. So to me, there is a blessing in that, in terms of how I got raised, that I was not unfamiliar with suffering for a lot, and not just within myself, and not just, you know, my mother or whatever, but all within myself. And So it came up in another time in another university thing, and this one woman got so mad at me around the suffering stuff, and you know, like I was, you know, like romanticizing it, right? Just, we're trying to get out of suffering. Well, I said, well, good luck with that, you know. I mean, you know, because you're never gonna. I mean, we are, you know, ask any of the Zen masters, you know, that's what you do. That is. If you think we are not suffering right now on this planet, right? And I think the word in the air, you know, I'm going to say what the word is in the air freeing Palestine. And now I'm going to say that word, you know. I want to say Palestine. And that has nothing to do with my incredible, incredible mourning, what if also has happened in Israel. But I hold that nation state responsible. Ultimately, the nation state, not the people, and not the pueblo of Palestine. But it's been too long. And all this stuff about genocide, when you can always, when you got the big guns on your side, you know, and you kill the children. That's what they say. If I recommend this book of, you know, 500-page book on California genocide, but he lists, you know, what the UN says, what is the elements of genocide, you know, and much of it has to do with the separation of children. That's why we're also bringing up the thing about the border, the separation of children, you know, and their murder, So I say this with all due respect to everybody who may or may not feel a personal connection with the losses in Israel and in Palestine. All due respect to your pain and their pain. and this crazy, the other war going on over here, and then, you know. So somebody, thank you, I didn't mean to go there. Somebody back there.
Hi. You had made a note on the...
Can you stand up? I'm sorry, I can't see you. There you are.
Sorry. I'm clumsy. You had made a note on the land acknowledgements that some institutions make prior before giving speeches or announcements or tours or even holding a class like this, and how that sometimes errs on the side of faux activism, for lack of a better word. Do you think that there's some sort of homogeneous rule to go by to determine whether it's a good or bad idea to make those acknowledgments, or if that even matters?
Thank you for that question, because I don't want to be misunderstood. So thank you for that. I think the land acknowledgement stuff has been really important for one fact that above all else is that people know where they are, where the history of where they're standing. It's been a really, really important thing to do. And it makes, you know, I wish people also kind of made the connection that it makes genocide present, which is usually not the case, you know. And so partly what it seems to me, you know, there's rules, you know, like every single class, you have to open it up. I mean, I think that what happens then, when you start jurisdicting how people, is that a word, jurisdicting? How people are supposed to, what people are supposed to do, you know, there's no spirit in that. And I think the idea is for you to find spirit in how you acknowledge, you know, the people, the land and the people and the sea. We have this incredible ocean here that we, you know, like for me, I mean, a lot of that land acknowledgement is quite private, right? And so as your professors, however they're dealing with that, one would like to be able to see that something was moving along as opposed to being, you know, like kind of like good Christians. I hate to be cynical like that, but it is kind of this thing about I'm a good citizen, I'm going to say the right thing, and that's the problem with all the rhetoric. That's the problem with a politics that gets very, again, you know, like I was talking about being, you know, woke and all of that, right? Like how things get stolen, language gets stolen from us, you know, and so partly our job is keeping it real, right? And that doesn't mean, you know, not to acknowledge, but how does one actually acknowledge, you know? And I think that's what really is the ideal thing, where you want people actually to be changed by doing that and not just be following the rules, right? Because I don't know about you guys, but, you know, like, so that's what I was saying, is that what's happened, so then everybody did their job, and what happened to our rebel spirit? So there's a part of me, you tell me, give me a rule, I'm going to say, I'm not going to do that, right? And there's something healthy in that, if it's coming from a place of saying, you know, that what is your truth in it, you know? And so it's always hard to talk about these things. That's a really hard part. Hard to talk about these things because they have to be talked about. But I'm going to tell you the truth is that oftentimes when you say those kind of things, there is nobody behind you. And you keep going, oh, where are my backup boys, you know? And nobody's there. And that, you should just know that. So it's not so we go back to the thing where the sister was talking about, you know, courage, you know. And, you know, again, this is not about me. It's not about aggrandizing myself. I'm saying us, one. So thank you for the question, though. It'll give me a chance to talk a little bit more about it. It can so easily be misinterpreted. You know, check your Facebook things and. Okay. What? Oh, you're agreeing with me. Okay. Right on. Okay. ¿Qué más? Gracias.
Hi.
Hi.
I was able to listen to your last portion. I was teaching, but really love your work.
Thank you.
One of the reasons I think I'm here is because of your work and other women of color's work. And we read, and I'll say we because at that time it was queer men of color in New York City. Right after 9/11, we had like a women of color reading group that was mostly queer male identified people. And all of you gave an internationalist vision and critique, as well as a cathartic writing medium at that moment for many of us. And I mean, I think just a few days back, another colleague just happened to write saying, oh, I'm teaching this bridge called My Back and Codex, and I'm thinking about you guys. It was like 20 years later.
Nice.
So that form of reverberation, I just wanted to affirm that, it's amazing. And it's amazing to be across the hallways from you 20 years later. But I'm just asking how you see now your writing as an internationalist project and a critique, as well as a form of a space for healing and survival, like all three together. Or do you see it at all?
Yeah, thank you for the question and those good words. I appreciate it. I feel I need a lot of time and a lot of space to find what I need to write and what I want to write, and not what is needed. If I think about what is needed, I'm saying this for the writers, if I think about what is needed, it becomes perfunctory in a certain level. I should do this. People don't know this. I need to teach them this. I need to, like that. And some of the energy in that one section that was hard for me to write comes out of that. I want you to think about this. This is important. This is a teacher in me, right? But I don't necessarily think, I'm interested in the writer that's not teaching. Because, if I'm teaching, it's something then that not even that I know so much. So the writing's always an exploration, even when I was writing here. But these are things I've thought about for a long time, and then I thought I have to write them. I should write about them. I should write about them. Especially that last part. I guess what I'm just trying to say is that I want to find out what I want to write. I want to have the time and the space to see what is reflected back to me and go with that, right? Because I am not young. And I've taught for, I don't know, how old am I now? So at least 40 years, right? So now is the time that if I'm going to get to another level in my work, and I don't mean that in, plot lines, if I can get to another place in my work that will also, I believe that the deeper I can be in my work, that the better it will actually end up serving, right? But I can't be thinking I'm serving when I'm doing it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that kills the high, It's like so it's just really, but it's really hard. I'm sure I'm sure you're right. So it's just, writing is a really interesting mirror. Sally can tell I was losing my mind. I've been trying to write this thing for so long. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the suffering. So, it's a process, but it's such a good question because you really have to, when I teach writing, I always say that if you're writing and it bores you, I assure you it's boring. If what you're writing is not being generative, then it's boring. And so that's our task then. We got to always be, digging it up. And say, I didn't know that until I wrote it. That's great when that happens. So you need to be able to, one needs to be able to cultivate that, which I look forward to doing relatively soon since, I'm not always going to be teaching here. Anyway, but we'll talk, you and I, across the hall. Yes? This is Roberta's question. Good. So, Roberta Cordero said she's making a connection between La Llorona and suffering, right? And La Llorona, the weeping woman. And it's interesting you say that, of course, because one of the things Las Maestras Center did when we first started here is that we organized what do we call it? A ceremony, an action, a ritual at the border. And at the border and at the detention center around the separation of children. And this was Celia's concept as a visual artist and an artist in general that, about the loss, that this, losing our children, that's Llorona, right? So what's the cry out? And so we just went down there and cried. We just cried, mis hijos, mis hijos, mis hijos. And so it is, I think that's why it got so, a lot of the interpretation of Llorona are very patriarchal, And I think when you get back to what it is when a woman actually loses her children, it is a horrible cry. That's where we started, too. It's like this horrible cry. And so, yes, it's culturally specific around suffering, ¿verdad? And then, yeah, that we did something with. Thank you.
Yes, all right. Well, may I thank you.
You're welcome.
Just very moving.